She thought it was just a mistake in her luxury hotel reservation, but when she encountered a dangerously attractive stranger emerging from her shower, she had no idea he was the billionaire owner of it all. If you love stories filled with unexpected encounters, secrets, and a passion that defies all the rules, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what happens next in this unexpected romance. Clara felt the weight of the last 48 hours on her shoulders as the taxi pulled up in front of the Ethelgard Grand Hotel. The exhaustion from the international trip was a fog in her mind, but the sight of the imposing glass and steel building woke her up. This was it, the place that could define the future of her career. Every detail of the facade screamed opulence, a world of power and luxury that seemed miles away from her reality. This wasn't just a luxury hotel, it was a symbol, and she needed to prove she belonged, even if only for one night. As she entered the lobby, the city noise faded, replaced by a reverent silence. The air smelled of fresh lilies and something else, something expensive and subtle, like sandalwood. The polished marble floor reflected the soft light of a crystal chandelier that cascaded from the ceiling like a waterfall of diamonds. Men in impeccable suits and elegant women passed her by, their voices a low murmur. For a moment, Clara felt small, an imposter in her travel-wrinkled blazer, but she took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and walked to the reception desk with a confidence she hadn't felt before. "Check in for Clara Evans," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. The receptionist, a young woman with an impeccable smile, tapped away at her keyboard. Her eyes widened slightly. "Ah, yes, Miss Evans. Welcome to the Ethelgard Grand. I see we have a very special reservation for you tonight. There was a slight issue with your original suite, so we've given you a complimentary upgrade to our presidential suite." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The presidential suite. She knew the company had booked a nice room, but this was on another level. "Are you sure? There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Miss Evans." The receptionist smiled, sliding a gold card key across the counter. "The room is all yours. It's on the top floor. I'm sure the view will please you." Stunned, Clara thanked her and headed for the private elevator. The golden key felt heavy in her hand, a passport to a world she'd only seen in magazines. As the elevator ascended in silence, she allowed herself a small smile. Maybe it was a sign that her presentation the next day would be a success. Maybe the universe was finally conspiring in her favor. The suite's door was made of dark, solid wood. When she inserted the key and opened it, her breath caught in her throat. The space wasn't a room, it was an apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the glittering city below. A cream velvet sofa invited lounging, and a modern fireplace was built into a stone wall. It was the kind of quiet, overwhelming luxury that whispered of power. She dropped her suitcase on the floor, the sound muffled by the plush carpet, and walked toward the window, amazed. For a moment, she forgot her fatigue, her anxiety, everything. She felt on top of the world. Kicking off her shoes, she sighed, a sound of pure relief. A long hot bath and a good night's sleep were all she needed. It was then that she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. The sound of running water. Clara froze. Her body tensed, and the luxurious silence of the suite suddenly felt menacing. She wasn't alone. Heart hammering against her ribs, she moved slowly across the room, her bare feet silent on the carpet. The sound was coming from the master bedroom. The door was ajar, and soft light spilled into the hallway. She peeked through the crack. The king-size bed was untouched, but the master bathroom door was slightly open, and from inside came the unmistakable sound of a shower. Panic began to rise in her throat. The receptionist had been mistaken. The suite was occupied. As she hesitated, unsure whether to run or scream, the sound of the shower stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. Each second stretched out, heavy with anticipation. And then, the bathroom door opened. A man stepped out, shrouded in steam. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a presence that instantly filled the room. A white towel hung low on his hips, and drops of water trickled down his defined chest. His dark hair was wet, and when he lifted his head, his eyes, a deep, piercing blue, met hers. There was surprise in his gaze, but no confusion, just a commanding calm. He watched her for a moment, head tilted before speaking. His voice was deep, smooth as velvet, but with a steely edge. "Can I help you?" His question hung in the air, soft and dangerous. "Can I help you?" wasn't an offer of assistance. It was a challenge. For a second, panic paralyzed Clara. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave that suite and slam the door behind her. But then the adrenaline turned into something else, indignation. She had traveled for 16 hours. She was exhausted. And this man, mesmerizing as he was in her room. She lifted her chin, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped the golden key tighter. "I think that's my question," she replied, a voice steadier than she felt. "What are you doing in my suite?" A slow, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. He didn't look the least bit threatened. On the contrary, he seemed amused. His blue eyes raked over her from head to toe, a gaze so intense that Clara felt completely exposed, as if he could see through her wrinkled blazer and read every insecurity she tried to hide. "Your suite," he repeated, his tone low and velvety but laced with disbelief. He took a step forward, moving completely out of the bathroom's shadow. The room's light accentuated the definition of his muscles, and Clara swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. It was a battle of wills, and she refused to be the first to back down. "Yes, I checked in a few minutes ago. The receptionist gave me this key," she said, holding out her hand and showing the gold card like a shield. "The presidential suite." He glanced at the key in her hand, then back to her face. The amused glint in his eyes deepened. "A golden key. Impressive, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Because this," he said, making a slow gesture that encompassed the luxurious space around them, "is my suite." His certainty was absolute, unshakable. It was the certainty of a man who had never had his authority questioned in his life. For a moment, doubt gripped Clara. What if she was wrong? What if the receptionist had made a colossal error? But she couldn't back down now. "Look, I don't know who you are, but the front desk sent me up here. If you think there's been a mistake, maybe you should call them." He took another step, closing the distance between them. The air suddenly felt warmer, thicker. Clara could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the subtle scent of expensive soap, and something uniquely masculine. Her heart began to pound, no longer just from fear, but from an overwhelming awareness of his proximity. He was too close, too large, and his presence was magnetic. He stopped just an arm's length away, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His blue eyes locked onto hers and the smile faded, replaced by an intense curiosity. "You have fire," he murmured, his voice so low it was almost a thought spoken aloud. "I like that." The statement caught her off guard, sending a flush creeping up her neck. This wasn't about a hotel room, not anymore. There was a dangerous undercurrent building between them, a raw, undeniable attraction that made the situation 1,000 times more complicated. He leaned in slightly, his voice a whisper. That brushed against her ear. "I don't need to call the front desk. I know who is registered in every room of this hotel." With that enigmatic statement, he straightened up and with an unnerving calm walked past her, as if she were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He moved to a mahogany dresser on the other side of the room, the towel still hanging perilously. Low on his hips, utterly unconcerned by her presence, Clara stood frozen, her body tingling, her mind reeling. He moved with the familiarity of someone who belonged, someone who owned this space. His arrogance was as natural as breathing. She took a shaky step back, her face burning, not just from embarrassment, but from something else. Something she didn't dare to name. Who the hell was this man? Clara remained rooted to the spot, watching as he opened a drawer and retrieved a dark metal watch, fastening it to his wrist with a casual, practiced motion. Every gesture was economical and filled with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He acted as if she were a piece of furniture, a momentary interruption in his routine, and this indifference irritated her, reigniting the flame of her determination. She would not be dismissed so easily. She opened her mouth to protest again, to demand he take her seriously, but was cut off by the soft ring of a telephone. It wasn't her cell phone. The sound came from a sleek black handset on the mahogany desk. The stranger turned, his movement fluid and unhurried. He answered the call, his voice instantly changing. The teasing amusement vanished, replaced by a tone of cold, cutting authority. "Sterling," he said, and that single word was enough to send a shiver down Clara's spine. She only heard his side of the conversation, but it was enough. Her eyes widened as he spoke. "No, unacceptable. Move the deadline to tomorrow morning. I don't care what they want. I want to know what they can deliver. Solve it." There was no room for negotiation in his voice. It was the tone of a man accustomed to giving orders and seeing them carried out without question. It was the voice of a CEO, a leader, a king in his castle. A chill of dread began to settle in Clara's stomach. A name echoed in her mind, a piece of research she had done for her presentation. Sterling. Sterling Hotels, the luxury empire that included the Ethelgard Grand. He hung up the phone with a final click, and the silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than before. Slowly he turned to face her. The mask of cold authority dropped away, and his blue eyes fixed on hers once more. But now there was a knowing glint in them. He knew that she understood. "Where were we?" he asked, his voice soft again, but now heavy with the weight of his identity. "Ah, yes, you were telling me that this is your suite." The blood drained from Clara's face. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrible, nauseating clarity. The complimentary upgrade, the presidential suite, his unshakable certainty. "Sterling, you're—" she whispered, her voice cracking, barely able to form the words. "You're Damian Sterling." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. The reclusive billionaire, the genius behind the world's most exclusive hotel brand, the man whose approval she desperately needed in the meeting tomorrow. And she had just accosted him, accusing him of being an intruder in his own home, while he was wearing nothing but a towel. Shame hit her like a physical wave, so strong she felt her cheeks burn and her knees go weak. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. Her entire professional future, the very reason she was here, felt like it was turning to smoke before her eyes. Damian Sterling watched every emotion flicker across her face. Shock, realization, panic, and finally, pure mortification. He didn't smile. He didn't mock her. Instead, he watched her with a quiet intensity, like a predator studying its prey. He moved toward her again, and this time Clara took an instinctive step back, a small retreat that did not go unnoticed. "It seems you've done your homework, Miss Evans," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes told a different story. They shone with something that wasn't anger, but fascination. He was more intrigued by her now than before. "But what you didn't know is that I use this suite as my private apartment when I'm in town, something my front desk staff seems to have conveniently forgotten." His voice wrapped around her, low and magnetic, and despite her panic, Clara's body reacted. A tremor ran through her, a dangerous mix of fear and a forbidden attraction that refused to be silenced. He was the most powerful man she had ever met, and she had encountered him at her most vulnerable. He stopped, the distance between them electric once more. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fleeting moment, before returning to her eyes. "Now that we've established who I am," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur that made her heart stumble, "the real question is, what am I going to do with you?" Damian Sterling's question, "What am I going to do with you?" and wasn't a threat, it was a promise that he was in absolute control. The air in the luxury suite grew thick, charged with an electricity that made Clara's skin tingle. Every professional survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to apologize, to explain, to somehow fix the monumental disaster she had just created. But the words died in her throat, trapped beneath the weight of his gaze. That blue gaze didn't judge her. Worse, it saw her. It saw the panic, the ambition, and the spark of defiance she still couldn't extinguish, and he seemed to be enjoying everything he saw. I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," she finally managed, her voice a shaky whisper. "There has clearly been a terrible mistake at the front desk. I'll go down immediately and sort this out. Please excuse the intrusion. She tried to take a step toward the door, a move to escape his intensity, to retreat into the safety of the corporate world. But he moved with her, mirroring her action, blocking her path without a single touch. His presence was an invisible wall. An apology is predictable, Miss Evans, he said, his voice a low murmur that vibrated in the space between them. So your reaction now, that's far more interesting. He was close enough now that she could see the tiny droplets of water still clinging to his dark lashes, close enough that the warmth from his body enveloped her like a blanket. Her panic was mingling with a dangerous sensation, a vertigo that made her dizzy. This was the billionaire who owned everything, the man who held her future in his hands, and all she could think about was the proximity of his skin, the sound of his breathing. "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered, the honesty slipping out in a moment of weakness. A shadow of a smile returned to his lips. "I don't want you to say anything." Slowly, as if he had all the time in the world, he raised his hand. Clara flinched, anticipating the touch, her body bracing for the impact. His fingers didn't go to her arm or her shoulder. They went to her chin, a gentle but unquestionably firm touch. He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his gaze, holding her there. His thumb brushed softly against her skin, and an electric jolt shot through her. It was an intimate, possessive touch, a gesture that shattered every professional barrier that should have existed between them. "You walked into my private space, you challenged me, and you looked at me as if I were the intruder," he said, each word spoken with hypnotic clarity. "You don't act like a frightened employee. You act like someone who believes she belongs here. The question isn't what I'm going to do to you." His eyes intensified, the blue deepening to a stormy shade. "The question is, why do I feel like I don't want you to leave?" The confession hung in the air, more shocking than any threat. Clara's heart hammered in her chest, a wild rhythm that echoed the truth in his words. She didn't want to leave either. That moment, dangerous and forbidden, felt more real than anything. He released her as suddenly as he had touched her, and the loss of contact left her feeling cold and exposed. He took a step back, creating a distance that felt like an abyss. "Wait. Here," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm going to get dressed, and then you and I are going to have a conversation." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode toward a luxurious walk-in closet, closing the door behind him with a soft click, leaving Clara alone in the silent suite, her heart in chaos and his words burning in her mind. The click of the closet door was like a gunshot in the silence, and then nothing. Clara was left alone in the middle of the vast presidential suite, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. The air still seemed to vibrate with his presence, with the echo of his voice and the phantom warmth of his touch on her chin. She let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding and staggered back, her back meeting the cool solidity of a wall. She needed support. She needed to ground herself in something real, because the world had just been turned upside down. Her mind, normally so logical and organized, was a chaos of conflicting emotions. A part of her, the professional, ambitious part that had driven her here, was screaming in panic. "Damian Sterling, you just confronted the billionaire Damian Sterling. Your career is over. The presentation tomorrow. The contract that could change her life." It all seemed to be dissolving in a haze of humiliation. But another part of her, a deeper, more instinctual part she barely recognized, was humming, buzzing with a dangerous energy, a forbidden attraction that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. She replayed his words in her mind, each one a glowing ember. "Why do I feel like I don't want you to leave?" No one had ever looked at her like that, with that raw mix of power, curiosity, and hunger. It wasn't the look of a boss at an employee in trouble. It was the look of a man at a woman. A man who saw something he wanted and was not used to being denied. Slowly, her eyes scanned the suite again, but this time she saw it differently. It was no longer just a luxury hotel room. It was his lair. It was an intimate, personal space. On the mahogany desk, next to the phone, lay a leather-bound book, open and face down, as if he'd been interrupted mid-sentence. In a corner bar, a bottle of expensive whiskey sat next to a single crystal glass. These were glimpses of the man behind the billionaire empire, and the fact that she was here witnessing it felt like a dangerous transgression. The very air smelled of him, a mix of the soap from his shower, the sandalwood she'd noticed in the lobby, and something else, something musky and unmistakably masculine. It was the scent of power, of control, the scent of a predator. And instead of fear, Clara felt a spark of response inside her, a silent surrender to the force of nature he represented. She touched her own chin where his fingers had been. The skin still tingled. That gesture, so possessive and intimate, had broken something inside her. He hadn't fired her. He hadn't humiliated her. He had challenged her, and worse, he had drawn her into his mystery. She was trapped in a game she didn't understand, with rules he was making up as he went along. Every fiber of her being told her to run, to bolt out that door, and never look back. But her feet remained planted on the floor, because in the silence of that luxury suite, while she waited for its billionaire owner to return, Clara admitted the terrifying truth to herself. She didn't want to run. She wanted to see how the game ended, and then she heard it, the soft sound of the closet door opening. Her heart leaped into her throat. She straightened up, pushing away from the wall, trying to gather what little composure she had left. He was coming, and their conversation was about to begin. Damian Sterling emerged from the closet, and for a moment, Clara's breath caught again. The transformation was stunning. The dangerously raw man wrapped in a towel was gone. In his place stood the tycoon. He wore perfectly tailored dark trousers and a crisp white cotton shirt, the top buttons undone at the collar, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin. His dark hair was still slightly damp, combed back from his face, accentuating the strong lines of his jaw. He was no longer vulnerable. He was in command, radiating an aura of power so palpable it felt like it was sucking the oxygen from the room. He moved with the same predatory grace as before, but now he was cloaked in layers of wealth and authority. His blue eyes met hers, their gaze sharp and analytical. He studied her as if evaluating a high-risk investment. "Drink," he offered, his voice calm and controlled. It wasn't a question, it was a disguised instruction. "No, thank you, Mr. Sterling," Clara replied, the formality a flimsy shield against the intimacy of the situation. He ignored her refusal, walking over to the corner bar. "I insist," he said, not looking back. A conversation like this requires something to steady the nerves, or in this case to sharpen them. He picked up the crystal glass that was already there and took a second, identical one. The sound of amber whiskey pouring into the glass broke the tense silence. He turned, holding one of the glasses out to her. Clara hesitated. Accepting the drink felt like a surrender, a tacit agreement to play his game. But refusing would be an act of defiance she wasn't sure she could afford. Slowly, she stepped forward and took the glass, her fingers brushing against his for a fraction of a second. The contact was electric, a reminder of what had transpired minutes ago. "Take a seat, Miss Evans," he said, gesturing with his head toward the cream velvet sofa. He didn't take a seat himself. Instead, he leaned casually against the edge of the large mahogany desk, crossing his arms over his chest. The position was calculated. He was relaxed yet elevated, looking down on her. It was a classic power play. Clara complied, perching on the edge of the sofa. The velvet was soft beneath her fingers, but she felt as if she were sitting on pins and needles. She held the heavy glass, its coolness a stark contrast to the heat rising in her face. "So," Damian began, his voice soft but sharp, "Clara Evans, development analyst for North Star Properties. You're here to present a partnership proposal for our new resort in Santorini. A proposal, I might add, that my team was already inclined to reject." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. He didn't just know who she was, he knew exactly what she wanted, and he was making it clear that she was at a disadvantage before she even began. "How do you know all of that?" she asked, her surprise overriding her composure. He took a small sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers over the rim of the glass. "I make it my business to know about everyone who attempts to do business with me, especially the ones who end up in my shower. A hot blush spread across her cheeks at the casual mention of the shower. He was deliberately disarming her, mixing the professional with the personal, keeping her off balance. "Mr. Sterling, about that. I truly am sorry," she began, trying to regain control of the narrative. "It was an honest mistake. I'm not interested in the mistake," he cut in, his voice sharp. "I'm interested in the reaction. You didn't panic. You didn't scream. You challenged me." He leaned forward, the intensity in his gaze pinning her to the spot. "You have a courage that most of the people who work for me lack, which brings me to a crossroads." He paused, letting the tension stretch to its breaking point. Clara held her breath, her heart hammering in her ears. "On one hand," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, "I could call security and have you removed for trespassing. I could blacklist your company, ensuring you never work in this industry again." Cold fear shot through Clara's veins. He could do it. With a snap of his fingers, he could destroy everything she had worked for. "Or," he said, and his blue eyes glinted with a dangerous, almost predatory light, "I could see that at courage, as an asset, and I could decide to give you a chance to convince me, not tomorrow in the boardroom, but right now, in here." The proposal hung between them, shimmering with danger and opportunity. He wasn't offering her a business meeting. He was offering something far more intimate and far more risky. Damian Sterling's words hung in the air, not as an offer but as an ultimatum. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft crackle of ice in his whiskey glass. For Clara, the world narrowed to that velvet sofa, to that man, and to the impossible choice he had laid before her. It was a trap. She saw it with crystal clarity, a beautifully crafted, dangerous trap. The first option, professional ruin, was the punishment. The second, the chance to make her pitch right there in that luxury suite in the middle of the night, was the temptation. Both options put her completely at his mercy. He wasn't just testing her business plan, he was testing her limits, her nerve, her composure under pressure. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her back. The whiskey in her glass sat, untouched. She could feel his eyes on her, a physical weight, watching, waiting. He was a chess master and she was the piece he had just cornered. One wrong move and it was checkmate. The initial panic began to morph into something sharper, more focused. Fire. The same fire he had noticed in her before. She hadn't gotten this far in her career by backing down from challenges. She hadn't flown halfway across the world to be intimidated by an arrogant billionaire, no matter how devastatingly attractive he was. He expected her to stammer. He expected her to beg or cower. He expected her to take the safe option of apologizing profusely and walking out of the room with her tail between her legs. She would do the opposite. Slowly, with a control she didn't feel, Clara lifted the whiskey glass and took a small sip. The liquid burned down her throat, a liquid fire that strengthened her spine. She placed the glass on the coffee table with a soft, deliberate click. Then she stood up. The move changed the dynamic instantly. She was no longer looking up at him. She moved to the center of the room, into the open space between the sofa and the desk, and turned to face him. Now they were on even ground. Their eyes met, and this time there was no fear in hers. There was determination. "I don't need your chance, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "My proposal doesn't need favors. It stands on its own merits." Damian's eyebrow arched by a fraction of a millimeter, the only sign of his surprise. A glint of respect, or perhaps something more dangerous, ignited in his blue eyes. Clara took a step forward, closing the distance he had created. "But since you seem to disdain the formalities of a boardroom, I accept your terms. You want me to convince you? Fine." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the color in his eyes deepen, close enough that the forbidden attraction between them became a crackling, living force. "You have my undivided attention until you—" "Finish that glass," she challenged, her voice dropping to a lower, more intimate tone. "But be warned. When I'm done, you won't just be approving a partnership for Santorini. You'll be wondering what took you so long to meet me." The bet was made. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. It was a duel of wills, fought in the silence of a billionaire's suite, with futures and hearts on the line, A slow, genuine smile finally spread across Damian Sterling's face. It wasn't amused or arrogant. It was the smile of a predator who had finally found a worthy opponent. "Begin," he said, his voice a deep purr. "Miss Evans, convince me." His word, "begin," hung in the air like the raising of a curtain on a stage. For an instant, the outside world ceased to exist. There was no North Star Properties or Sterling Hotels. There was only the two of them, caught in this high-voltage moment, the future being decided not in a boardroom, but right here, on the plush carpet of a billionaire's suite. Clara felt the adrenaline course through her veins, sharp and intoxicating. This wasn't the rehearsed speech she had practiced for weeks. This was improvisation, a dangerous dance where every word, every gesture mattered. She didn't retreat. Instead, she began to move, a slow, deliberate pace around the coffee table, forcing him to follow her with his eyes. She was taking command of the space, turning his lair into her stage. "Most people look at Santorini and see what's already there," she began, her voice soft but resonating with passion. "The sunsets, the blue domes, the romance. They build postcard hotels, interchangeable and soulless. They sell a fantasy, not an experience." She paused near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the glittering city forming a breathtaking backdrop behind. Her, the streetlights cast her in silhouette, making her a captivating figure against the skyline. Damian remained leaning against the desk, motionless, but his eyes never left her. He watched her with a focused intensity, as if committing every word, every nuance of her expression to memory. The whiskey in his hand was forgotten. "But your brand, Mr. Sterling," she continued, turning to face him again, "has never been about the predictable. The Ethelgard isn't just a luxury hotel, it's a retreat. It's about exclusivity, about offering something that money alone can't buy. A story." She moved toward him again, but this time the movement was different. It was confident, almost seductive. She wasn't invading his space. She was inviting him into hers. "Our proposal isn't about building another five-star hotel. It's about creating a legacy. We're proposing a boutique retreat, tucked away on the lesser-known cliffs of Oya. Private villas, each with its own infinity pool, designed by a local architect to merge with the landscape, not dominate it. No grand lobbies, no crowded restaurants. Just silence, privacy, and service so intuitive it feels like telepathy." As she spoke, her passion for the project was palpable. She was no longer an analyst reciting data. She was a visionary painting a picture he wanted to be a part of. She stopped just a few feet from him, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone, almost a secret shared between them. "Imagine a guest, Mr. Sterling, a man like you, who has the world at his feet, but no peace. What does he truly want? He doesn't want a crystal chandelier. He wants the feel of the sea breeze on his skin at midnight. He wants the silence. He wants a place where he can be invisible." The word invisible hit its mark. Clara saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a vulnerability he rarely showed the world. She had found the chink in his armor. She wasn't selling a hotel. She was selling him a sanctuary. The silence stretched on after she finished. She had laid her cards on the table. The ball was in his court. Slowly, Damian pushed himself away from the desk. He took one last swallow of his whiskey, draining the glass, and set it down with a decisive click. He started walking toward her, his gaze never wavering. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel his breath. The sexual tension between them came rushing back, more potent than ever, now layered with a newfound intellectual respect. He said nothing about the proposal. He didn't talk about numbers or logistics. Instead, his blue eyes searched hers, dark and filled with an emotion she couldn't decipher. "You're dangerous, Clara Evans," he said, his voice a low, husky purr, and for the first time, he used her first name. "You don't just understand business, you understand desire." Damian's words, "you understand desire," weren't a compliment. They were an accusation that she knew exactly what she was doing, the effect she was having on him. The sound of her own name, Clara, from his lips, was like an electric shock, short-circuiting the last barrier of professionalism she was trying to maintain. Miss Evans was a character she could play. Clara was just her, exposed and vulnerable, under his penetrating gaze. She tried to retreat, tried to find words to steer the conversation back to the safe ground of business. "My job is to understand consumer desire, Mr. Sterling. It's the key to luxury marketing." The sentence sounded weak and academic, ridiculous in the charged atmosphere of the suite. "No," he said, his voice low and firm, dismissing her attempt. With a single word, he closed the final inch of space between them. There was nowhere left to retreat. Her body was mere inches from his, and she could feel the heat radiating from him in waves. He was like a sun, and she was caught in his orbit, unable to escape the pull. His hand moved, and Clara held her breath, expecting him to touch her chin again, but he didn't. His hand came to rest on the curve of her waist, his fingers splaying possessively over the fabric of her blazer. The touch was firm, anchoring her in place. It was not a casual gesture, it was a claim. A shiver ran through Clara's body, a mixture of fear and dizzying excitement. Through the thin fabric, she could feel the contained strength in his fingers, the promise of power he held in reserve. "Stop calling me Mr. Sterling," he commanded, his voice a rough murmur near her ear. His breath, laced with the faint scent of whiskey, brushed against her skin, and she shuddered. "My name is Damian." His name, spoken by him in that intimate tone, felt like the confession of a secret. Clara looked up to meet his eyes, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The blue of his eyes had darkened, turning to a deep midnight, turbulent with conflicting emotions. She could see the battle raging within him, the billionaire CEO versus the man, and the man was winning. "Damian," she whispered, and the name on her lips felt both foreign and perfectly right. Saying his name aloud was a surrender, an acknowledgement of what was happening between them. His thumb moved at her waist, a slow, circular motion that sent waves of heat through her body. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and Clara felt her lips part in anticipation. Time seemed to slow. The distant hum of the city faded away. The only reality was his closeness, the scent of sandalwood and power, the pressure of his hand, and the unmistakable hunger in his eyes. She knew she should pull away. She knew she was in dangerous waters that could destroy her career, but her body refused to obey. Instead, she leaned into him, an almost imperceptible movement, drawn in by his gravity. He saw it. He felt it. A low sound, almost a growl of frustration and desire, escaped his throat. He leaned down, his forehead almost touching hers, his mouth inches away. "Every instinct for self-preservation I have is telling me this is a colossal mistake," he murmured, his voice rough with a brutal truth. "Bringing you into my company would be a mistake. Being in this room with you is a mistake." His gaze met, hers again intense and consuming. "But right now," he confessed, his breath hot against her lips, "I don't think I care." His confession, "I don't think I care," hung in the charged air of that luxury suite, shattering Clara's last barrier of resistance. That moment was no longer about a contract or a career. It was about the raw, undeniable truth that had been pulsing between them since their eyes first met. That unexpected encounter had become a turning point in their lives, a knot of fate that neither of them could untie. Her world shrank to that single moment. The glow of the city lights through the window, the scent of whiskey and power, the pressure of his hand on her waist. It all merged into a sensory overload that left her breathless. The fear was still there, a cold whisper in the back of her mind, warning of the consequences of the scandal of getting involved with the billionaire owner of the hotel. But it was a whisper drowned out by the roar of her own blood in her ears, by the frantic rhythm of her heart beating in unison with his. "Then, don't care," she whispered back, the words a permission, a challenge, and a surrender all in one. It was the most reckless decision of her life, and the only one she felt she could make. That was all he needed. The battle in Damian's eyes ended. The hesitation vanished, replaced by an absolute, predatory certainty. He closed the final distance, and their lips met. It wasn't a gentle or tentative kiss. It was a collision, a clash of two forces that had been held back for too long. It was hungry, possessive, the culmination of all the unspoken tension that had built between them. His mouth was firm and demanding, claiming hers with an authority. That left her feeling both weak and powerful at the same time. A small sound of surprise and surrender escaped Clara's throat, and she melted against him. Her hands, which had been limp at her sides, rose instinctively, her fingers tangling in his soft, dark hair. She pulled him closer, meeting his fire with her own, an act of defiance and mutual desire. This was the beginning of a forbidden passion, and she was diving in head first. His hand slid from her waist to her back, pressing her firmly against the length of his body. Now there was no space, no air, only the overwhelming connection between them. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest, the rapid beat of his heart against hers. The kiss deepened, becoming slower, more exploratory, a dance of dominance and submission where the lines blurred with every passing second. He tasted of whiskey and surrender, of courage and fear. He tasted every facet of her that had intrigued him since he first laid eyes on her, and she in turn tasted the power, the control and the surprising vulnerability that lay just beneath his surface. This wasn't just a kiss. It was a wordless conversation, an exchange of secrets they would never dare to speak aloud. When Damian finally pulled away, it was only to catch his breath. Their foreheads remained pressed together, eyes closed, both of them trembling with the intensity of what had just happened. The silence in the room was profound, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of that kiss, with the promise of more to come. He opened his eyes slowly, the blue now dark and stormy, filled with a raw desire that made her dizzy. His hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. This, he said, his voice low and husky, each word weighted with inevitability, changes everything. Clara couldn't speak. She just nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew he was right. That kiss, the start of their billionaire romance, wasn't an ending. It was the real beginning, and there was no turning back. Damian's words, "This changes everything," echoed in the silence that settled between them. It was an undeniable truth, heavy and irrevocable. The kiss had demolished the fine line that separated the professional and the personal, leaving them in new, dangerous territory. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of exhilaration and dread. She looked into his eyes, searching for a sign of regret, for a glimpse of the calculating CEO to return. But she found none. What she saw was a reflection of her own confusion, and a desire that was too strong to contain. He released her slowly, the loss of his touch leaving her suddenly cold. He stepped away, not far, but enough to create a space for them both to breathe. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that seemed strangely human, almost vulnerable. For a moment, the untouchable billionaire looked like just a man fighting a temptation he hadn't seen coming. "Tomorrow's presentation," he said, his voice hoarse, breaking the silence, "is cancelled." Clara's heart plummeted. The icy fear returned with a vengeance. "Cancelled? But not like that," he interrupted, turning to face her with a renewed intensity. "I can no longer sit in a boardroom and pretend to be an impartial judge of your project. No one would believe it, and I wouldn't be honest." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "I can't be your client, Clara." Those words should have devastated her. It was confirmation that her career and her desire had destructively collided. But then he continued, and what he said next changed the course of everything. "But I can be your partner." Clara blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean the project you described. It's brilliant," he admitted, the praise from him warming her from the inside out. "It's exactly the kind of vision Sterling Hotels needs, but I can't just approve it now. It would look inappropriate." The way he said the word made it clear he was referring to much more than business. He moved toward her again, this time with a deliberate calm. "Here's what we're going to do. You fly home tomorrow. Officially, your proposal will be under review. Behind the scenes, I will restructure it myself, not as an outside pitch, but as an internal project, a joint venture. And you," he paused, his gaze intense, "will be the one to lead it from here." The offer was staggering, a career opportunity that surpassed her wildest dreams. But she understood the silent price. The price was secrecy, The price was him. "And what happens with us?" she whispered. "The most important question of all." Damian's gaze softened. "That," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur, "if we figure out, quietly." It was a deal, sealed not with contracts but with a look. An agreement to keep their professional and personal lives in separate worlds, even when they both knew it was a lie. Because from that kiss on, the two worlds were already irrevocably intertwined. Damian's offer hung in the air, audacious and fraught with risk. Leading a project for Sterling Hotels was the dream of a lifetime, but the path to it was now shrouded in secrets and a forbidden passion. Clara knew that accepting meant stepping fully into his world, a world of power, luxury, and rules that he alone defined. Looking at him, at the certainty in his blue eyes, she realized there had never really been a choice. From the moment he had stepped out of that shower, her fate was tied to his. "All right," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but firm with decision. "I accept." A subtle relief washed over Damian's features, easing the tension in his jaw. He hadn't been sure she would take the silent bargain, the complexity that came with the offer. Her acceptance was a mutual surrender. He took a step forward but stopped himself, as if an invisible barrier held him back. That kiss had changed the rules. They could no longer touch with the same recklessness. Now, every gesture had weight. Every touch had a consequence. "My assistant will be in contact in the morning with your flight details," he said, his voice shifting back to a professional tone, though the heat in his eyes betrayed him. "And she will arrange a different suite for you for the night, obviously." The mention of another suite was a stark reminder of their situation. They were building walls of professionalism around something that was fundamentally personal. Clara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. The night that had started with a booking error was ending with a deal that would rewrite her future. She picked up her bag, the motion grounding her back in reality. It was time to leave. She walked to the door, and he followed. At the threshold of the suite where it all began, she stopped and turned to face him. The distance between them felt like a chasm, filled with all the things they couldn't say. "Not yet." "Damian," she began, testing his name again. "Clara," he replied, his voice deep and resonant. There was nothing more to be said. The real agreement wasn't in their words, but in the silence between them, in the promise that this wasn't an end, but an intermission. He reached out not to touch her, but to open the door for her. As she passed him, their arms brushed for a fraction of a second. The spark was instantaneous, a reminder of the fire they had just ignited. They both drew a sharp breath at the contact. Clara didn't look back as she walked down the silent corridor. She could feel his eyes on her with every step, and she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that this would not be the last time she stood at his door. The new suite was, by any normal standard, the epitome of luxury. It was spacious, elegantly decorated, with Egyptian cotton sheets and a breathtaking view of the city, but to Clara it felt empty, cold, silent. It was the silence that bothered her the most. In the presidential suite, the silence had vibrated with Damian's presence, with tension and electricity. Here the silence was just absence. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her body finally succumbing to the exhaustion and shock of the night. Her legs were trembling. She let out a long, unsteady breath. What had just happened? In a matter of hours, she had gone from being a nervous analyst to the potential secret lover of one of the most powerful billionaires in the world. She walked slowly around the room, her fingertips tracing the cool surfaces of the furniture. Nothing felt real. It was as if she had stepped into a movie, into the kind of steamy romance novel she would normally read on a quiet night. But the tingle on her lips, where he had kissed her, was real. The memory of the weight of his hand on her waist was real. Clara moved to the window just as she had in the other suite. The view was almost identical, a sea of twinkling lights stretching to the horizon. Outside, the city lived its nightlife, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded floors above. She wondered what he was doing right now. Was he standing at the same window, looking out at the same city, thinking of her? Or had he already switched back to business mode, the incident compartmentalized and filed away like any other transaction? doubt gnawed at her. He had called her brilliant, but also a mistake. He had offered her an incredible career opportunity, but at what cost? She was becoming a secret, a risk he was willing to take. But for how long? She turned from the window and sat on the edge of the impeccably made bed. She should be celebrating. Her proposal, her dream project, was coming true in a way she had never imagined. But instead of euphoria, she felt a deep melancholy. Success was now irrevocably tied to him, to a forbidden relationship that had barely begun. She thought of the kiss. It wasn't just passion, it was a revelation. In that moment, she had felt a connection with him that went beyond physical attraction. She had seen a glimpse of the man behind the billionaire empire, the man who longed for a place to be invisible, and she, somehow, had become the keeper of that secret. Closing her eyes, she lay back on the bed, still fully dressed. His scent, sandalwood and whiskey, seemed to linger on her own skin, a phantom reminder of his closeness. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind was racing, replaying every word, every look, every touch. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or taking the first step toward her true destiny. The only thing she knew, with a terrifying certainty, was that she had no regrets, and that she couldn't wait to see him again. Long after Clara was gone, the presidential suite, his private sanctuary, felt suddenly too large, too quiet. The echo of her presence lingered, a subtle energy that clung to the air. Damian stood at the door for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the empty corridor where she had disappeared. He could still feel the phantom warmth where their arms had brushed, a spark that tingled on his skin. Slowly he closed the door, the click of the lock finalizing the most unexpected night of his life. He turned, and his eyes fell on the glass of whiskey she had left on the coffee table, nearly untouched. A small ring of condensation marked where it had rested. It was the only physical proof that she had been there, that it hadn't all been a fever dream. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of weariness he rarely allowed himself. For years he had built his empire on logic, control, and the deliberate suppression of emotion. The women in his life were like his business deals, carefully managed transactions with clear terms and no messy entanglements. He never mixed the personal and the professional. It was the golden rule that kept him at the top, untouchable. And in a single night, Clara Evans had demolished that rule with the force of a hurricane. He walked to the bar and poured himself another whiskey, downing it in one swift gulp. The burn of the alcohol did nothing to extinguish the fire she had ignited within him. He remembered every detail about her, the way her eyes flashed with defiance even when she was afraid, the passion in her voice as she spoke about her project, the way her lips parted under his. She had read him. That was the most dangerous part. She didn't look at him and see the billionaire Damian Sterling. She looked at him and saw a man who longed for silence, for a place to be invisible. She hadn't sold him a resort. She had sold him a glimpse of peace, something he had stopped looking for long ago. The kiss. He closed his eyes. That kiss had been a monumental mistake, a mistake he found himself wanting to make again and again. The feel of her in his arms, the way she met his passion with her own, had shaken him to his core. It wasn't just physical desire, it was recognition. It was like finding a piece of his soul he hadn't known was missing. The deal he offered her was impulsive, a high-stakes gamble born from the desire to keep her in his orbit. Bringing her into his empire to work beside him was like playing with fire. There would be gossip, scrutiny. It would be a logistical nightmare to maintain their secret. And yet, the thought of never seeing her again, of letting her walk out of his life as abruptly as she had entered, was unbearable. He walked to the window, gazing out at the city he practically owned. The glittering lights that once represented his achievements now seemed insignificant. He was a king in his glass castle, but tonight he had never felt more alone. The suite, his refuge, now felt like a gilded cage. He knew he was entering a dangerous game, an office romance at the highest possible level, but for the first time in a long time, Damian Sterling didn't care about the risks. He only cared about finding out how far this forbidden passion would take them. Clara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the ghost of Damian's kiss on her lips, a burning memory that left her restless. The morning sun streamed through the window of the anonymous suite, bringing with it the harsh, cold light of reality. Had it all been a fever dream, a fantasy created by exhaustion and the overwhelming luxury of that unexpected encounter? Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was an email. The sender was Damian Sterling's executive assistant. The tone was cold, formal, and impersonal. It stated that her return flight was scheduled for early that afternoon, and a car would be waiting in the lobby. There was no mention of the project, no personal word. Clara's heart sank. The icy panic returned. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe. In the light of day, the billionaire CEO had come to his senses, and she was just a mistake he was sweeping under the rug. She sat up in bed, the weight of uncertainty crushing her like a physical force. And then her phone vibrated again. This time it was not an email. It was a text message from an unknown number. It contained only 6 words, but they changed everything. Santorini is waiting for its leader. D. A sigh of relief and something much deeper escaped Clara's lips. It wasn't a dream. It was real. The D. At the end of the message was an intimate signature, a secret shared only between them. This was their true agreement, hidden beneath the facade of corporate emails. The game had begun, a forbidden romance with rules only they knew. With a fresh wave of determination, Clara stood up. She showered, dressed, and as she walked out of the luxury hotel, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew her path would lead her back to this place, and inevitably to him. 6 weeks later, Clara was a transformed woman. She walked the marble corridors of Sterling Hotel's New York headquarters with a newfound confidence. As the new leader of the Ethelgard Santorini project, she was the talk of the company. Her meteoric rise was attributed to her undeniable brilliance, a narrative carefully crafted by Damian to protect the truth. In public, they were the picture of professionalism. In meetings, he was the untouchable CEO. She was the promising executive. He challenged her, questioned her projections, and treated her with the same exacting standards he applied to everyone else. No one would ever suspect, but their real relationship blossomed in the shadows. It was stolen glances in crowded hallways that lasted a fraction of a second too long. It was late-night emails with the subject Project Update, where the final paragraph held a personal message that made her heart race. It was the rare nights when, under the guise of a strategy meeting, he would meet her at a discreet restaurant across town, where they could just be Clara and Damian, if only for a few hours. The tension of this secret was an addiction. Every stolen moment was precious. Every discreet touch, like a brush of hands when reaching for a document, was a spark that kept them ignited. This forbidden passion wasn't just a risk. It was the air they breathed. One afternoon, leaving a meeting where she had brilliantly defended a risky aspect of the project, Damian followed her out. The corridor was momentarily empty. "You were ruthless in there, Evans," he said, the formality of his tone at odds with the fire in his eyes. "I learned from the best, Sterling," she replied, a smile playing on her lips. He stopped, blocking her path. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and urgent. "My apartment, 8 o'clock. We have financial projections to discuss." The promise, in his words, was unmistakable. Clara's heart leaped. "I'll be there," she whispered. The danger of being discovered only made everything more intense. Not everyone at Sterling Hotels was thrilled with Clara's rise. Marcus Thorne, the senior vice president of development, saw the newcomer not as a rising star, but as an obstacle. For years, Marcus had seen himself as Damian's right-hand man, the logical successor. Clara's arrival, and the obvious, though disguised favor Damian showed her, ate at him from the inside. Marcus was a man who noticed things. He noticed the way Damian's gaze would linger on Clara for a beat too long in a crowded room. He noticed how Damian, a man who delegated nearly everything, personally read every single report from the Santorini project. And he noticed the glow. In Clara's eyes, after a supposed late-night meeting with the CEO, he began to watch. His suspicion was a poison seed growing in the dark. To him, the official story didn't add up. An unknown analyst doesn't get handed a billion-dollar project overnight, no matter how brilliant. There was another layer to the story, a secret, and Marcus was determined to drag it into the light. His chance came during a quarterly review. Clara was presenting, and Damian was watching from across the long conference table. At one point, Clara stumbled over a word, a minor slip of nerves. Instantly, Damian's expression softened, an almost imperceptible flicker of concern and encouragement crossing his face before the CEO mask slammed back into place. It was a tiny moment. No one else noticed, but Marcus saw it, and to him that look was a confession. The king's armor had a crack, and Marcus now knew exactly where to apply pressure. The power play had just gained a new, dangerous player. Marcus didn't confront. He circled. He began to ingratiate himself with Clara, masking his hostility under a veneer of mentorship. He invited her to coffee, praised her work, and offered advice on navigating the corporate world of Sterling hotels. "Damian can be hard to read," Marcus told her one day, over coffee in the executive lounge. "He values loyalty above all else, but he also has a history of losing interest quickly, in projects and in people." The warning was subtle, planted like a seed of doubt. Clara felt a chill but kept her composure. "I appreciate the advice, Marcus, but I'm confident in my work." "Oh, I have no doubt about your work," he replied, a smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm talking about the game around the work. It's important to understand all the pieces on the board." Clara's distrust of him grew with every interaction. She could feel the danger rolling off him, the veiled threat in every friendly word. She mentioned it to Damian during one of their late-night calls. "Marcus is ambitious," Damian said, his voice tight. "He always has been. Just keep him at a distance. Don't give him anything he can use. He's not a threat." But Clara wasn't so sure. She felt like she was walking a tightrope, with success on one side and ruin on the other, and Marcus Thorne was standing below with a pair of scissors, patiently waiting for her to slip. This office romance was becoming a minefield, and she didn't know where the next explosion would come from. The explosion came on a Tuesday night. Clara was working late, finishing a report in her office. The door opened without a knock. It was Marcus. He entered with the same fake smile as always, but this time there was a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Miss Evans, always the last to leave. That's the dedication that got you here, I imagine," he said, his tone soft but edged with venom. "Mr. Thorne," Clara replied, her heart beginning to race. "Can I help you with anything?" He ignored her question and walked across the room, picking up an architectural model of the Santorini resort. "It's a fascinating project. Damian has never been so personally involved in an undertaking. He has a particular interest in this one." He looked directly at her, his smile growing sharper. "You must be very persuasive." Clara's blood ran. Cold, that wasn't an insinuation. It was an accusation. "I believe the merits of the project speak for themselves," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. Marcus laughed, a low, unpleasant sound. He placed the model back on the table and moved closer, leaning over her desk, invading her personal space. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let me give you a piece of advice, Clara. I've known Damian for years. I've seen him play. Chess in business and in life, he's a master. But in every game of chess, some pieces are more important than others." He stared at her, his eyes shining with malice. "Just a friendly warning. In a game of kings, make sure you know if you're the queen or just a pawn about to be sacrificed." He straightened up, smiled one last time and walked out, leaving the door open and the silence heavy with his venomous words. Clara sat, paralyzed, long after Marcus had gone. The echo of his words, queen or pawn, ricocheted in her mind, each repetition louder and more terrifying. The air in her plush office suddenly felt thin, difficult to breathe. His words were poison, designed to infect every thought, to stain every memory. She thought of their first meeting, the job offer, the stolen glances, the secret kisses. Had it all been part of a larger game? A game where only Damian understood the rules? Was she really the leader of a brilliant project? Or was she just a distraction? A convenient piece in the strategy of a billionaire who always got what he wanted? Her phone vibrated on the desk. His name flashed on the screen. Damian. A wave of nausea washed over her. Before, seeing his name brought a jolt of adrenaline and happiness. Now it was a source of anxiety and suspicion. She stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the answer button. Trust, the fragile foundation upon which they had built their secret world, had been shattered. Marcus didn't need proof. He only needed to plant the seed of doubt. And that seed had found fertile ground in Clara's heart. She looked out the window at the lights of New York, feeling more alone than ever. Was she in love with the man or the idea of him? And more importantly, was he in love with her or just with the game? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as her phone continued to ring. You've felt the spark, witnessed the kiss, and walked the tightrope of their secret. But now the game has turned deadly, and the walls are closing in. Doubt has been planted, and Clara's next choice could destroy everything. If you don't want to miss a single moment of this billionaire romance, if you need to know whether she will answer that call and confront the man who could be her greatest love or her ultimate ruin, be sure to subscribe now and turn on notifications. Clara and Damian's story is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more passion, betrayal, and secrets. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning.